Dr. Powell, thank you so much for being here. I learn so much from you every time we talk. So thank you for taking the time.
I can't tell you how much that means to me, Brandon. We feel the same way about you, so it's very mutual.
Oh, thank you. I want to talk about something that I have always struggled with, and I actually don't know much about, and that's impulsivity. Growing up with ADHD, it's just, we blurt stuff out in the classroom, and we are just wild. And I can't tell you how many times I was reprimanded in school. Why is it that people with ADHD have higher levels of impulsivity?
Well, first of all, that's very surprising to me, Brandon, because I think of you as somebody who's very in control. Like, you're an athlete, you do this. So you can be in control. It's not that you can't be in control. It's that impulsivity is sort of an index of the relationship between big feelings and reactions. So having big impulses, so impulsivity, and how much control the brain is able to exercise over those, and what state you're in. So when you were young, when you were in school, you had the same kind of impulse as most kids, but you didn't always have the same level of what we would call inhibitory control or response control. So those things would come up and you weren't at the same time thinking maybe about what would happen if you just let it come out. You didn't have the metacognitive adult brain analyzing it. And so things came out before you thought it through. And for kids, when that happens, the balance between their impulses and their regulatory control, their inhibitory control, the balance is not ideal.
And so what is the relationship? Like, why do kids with these executive function challenges, specifically ADHD, struggle with impulse control?
It's like a car with a really strong engine. It's like the proverbial Ferrari with the bicycle brakes. So you got a big engine that like goes fast, and that feels great. And, going fast is fun. But if you don't have strong brakes, you can't regulate all that energy and speed. And so it's, sometimes it's kind of like go or stop, but like anything in between is hard to control. So that there's not the same level of control, especially when you're young.
So is that just due to like dopamine levels?
Yeah, dopamine is part of it. But it also does have something to do with the superhighways of neurons in the brain. Part of what we're seeing is that the control that we think of as coming from the frontal cortex. So everybody talks about frontal lobe executive functions or prefrontal executive functions. It's not like that part of the brain is just kind of sitting there doing the control. It's all about the superhighways that go between that part of the brain and the motor system. The motor system in the brain is required for all of our behavior and activity. And there are these circuits or highways that create feedback loops from sensory input to motor output. And so when you're maybe out playing a football game and, somebody comes at you, you automatically, do whatever you do. And your motor system is responding to the sensory input that you're getting. And sometimes that is like a big reaction, and sometimes it's a very well controlled reaction. And the amount of control that you can exercise over that motor response depends upon the strength of those circuits, of those superhighways of information. They become better developed over time, so they become more myelinated. In other words, the fatty substance that helps them become faster and faster in terms of electrical conduction, that develops over time from use. And so, as they say in the field, neurons that wire together fire together. The more times you exercise control, the better your control. And so that as an athlete, the more times you throw a ball, the better you get at throwing the ball. The more times you kick a ball, the more control you have over where it goes. So it's the same with behavior. The more you exercise control over the behaviors, the better your brain gets at like maybe thinking ahead or stopping itself. The stronger those brakes become. They're not very strong in little kids. Little kids do what they're going to do, but the top-down, what we call top-down control, comes from the frontal lobe to the motor system and gets better and better. The brakes get stronger and stronger the more we use them. But it's probably the case that, there is definitely a lot of individual variability, genetically, developmentally, environmentally. So everybody's got different kinds of brakes, different kinds of engines, different kinds of neurochemicals.
Thank you for outlining that. That was a great rundown. Like it makes a lot of sense. Just getting really practical with it. So when a parent comes in and says, let's say I have a fourth grader or fifth grader that is getting in trouble for impulsivity, how do you strengthen those pathways or those brakes?
So there's probably a lot of levels. Those kids are little. We don't want to put them through like some kind of intensive behavioral system to try to strengthen those things the way you would like PT or something like that. But we do want to be, as parents, as teachers, as coaches, giving them opportunities to both playfully and kind of more seriously, go and then stop. Go and then stop. Learn how to know when it's time to stop. So doing a lot of communicating with kids, praising them when they get it right. Positive reinforcement is the best possible form of education, and behavioral shaping is really, you want them to know when they get it right. If you only tell them when they get it wrong, like don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, they get the message that they're just wrong, that they're a bad kid, that they're in trouble. Then they get more anxious or they get more oppositional because they're tired of being told to not do things.
Thank you for saying that, positive reinforcement. The least favorite fact that I cite all the time is that students with ADHD get 20,000 more negative comments on average before positive by the age of 10, and it goes up quickly from there. Yeah. So thank you for saying the positivity is more likely to shape the behavior, because I think that's so important. I think we missed that. You said something earlier about feedback loops.
Yeah.
This is something I know we talk about all the time. Quick feedback loops are really good for students with executive function challenges. Yeah. How does that play into impulsivity?
The brain kind of needs to know as soon as possible what the issue was or what the behavior was. And so if, for example, a child does something in school and they don't get a consequence for that until they come home, and that consequence also doesn't come until they want to go somewhere and they're not allowed, or it's a curfew, or it's something that happens way distant from the behavior, it doesn't connect as well with that behavior. The closer in proximity to the event or to the impulse, the more the response gets attached to the right behavior, the more likely it is when that behavior starts to arise or that impulse starts to arise, they're going to be able to associate like, oh, this is the thing that's going to get me in trouble. This is the thing that's going to make me miserable later. But it's when someone has an impulse, they don't stop in the middle of the impulse to think about consequences. That's not what brains do normally, and that's not what ADHD brains do especially. So stopping is what's hard. You have to really associate the desire to stop the impulse with the impulse. That makes sense.
How do parents give quick feedback loops without just this constant on your tail nagging that no parent wants to be?
One of the things I think is really important for parents to know is, contrary to some of the parenting guidance out there, consequence-based parenting doesn't work very well with impulsive kids. So the ABC model of dealing with impulsive behaviors is you don't rely upon the consequence. That's too late. It comes later. You focus on what are called the antecedents of the behavior. You focus on helping kind of set the stage for kids to behave in the way that you hope they will, giving them the structure so that they don't, kind of go off the road. They need the rails, they need the structure, giving them hints and clues and as much upfront education about what's going to work. Sometimes parents think, well, he should know that, or she should know that. They don't know that.
The worst word you can say is should, right? Yeah, that should word drives you and I crazy.
Yeah. I think because, and this is especially true with, there are so many kids that we see that are really bright kids, and parents do not understand why, if they're that bright, they don't know better when it comes to a behavior or something they say. And it's that, well, they might know better after they've done it or said it, but it's not a choice. It's something that it's an impulse, and we all have impulses. We all can identify with that time we, bought an impulse buy in the grocery store, or an impulse buy on Amazon, or, said something impulsively to a friend and we realized afterwards that it might have hurt their feelings and we didn't mean to. It was just sort of an impulse. And so we all have impulses and are better and worse at stopping those impulses. And kids who have problems thinking ahead while they're in the middle of an impulse need a lot more just teaching and empathy about man, that's hard for you, isn't it? Let's figure out why that's hard for you and come up with some cues or hints, or, if I see you doing something where I think you're about to go over the edge, I'm gonna, wink or scratch my ear, or I'm gonna do something to cue you.
And it's fascinating that consequences don't necessarily work as well with impulsive behaviors.
Yeah.
Let me give you two situations which I hear daily. One is the elementary school parent who can't get out the door on time, where their kid is, they have the same to-do list every morning: brush your teeth, get ready, comb your hair, and impulsively gets off track on something they like. And then the middle school, high school parent who it's homework time, they're supposed to be doing their homework, and impulsively opens a new tab and they're on Minecraft website, something like that.
There they are.
How would you take that behavioral model and apply it to each situation?
My automatic inclination when I hear a scenario like that is, it depends. It depends on the kid. It depends on their other resources. It depends on the parents' resources. But what I would say is that, these are the situations where parents need to kind of get in the weeds and figure out, why is the child opening that tab? Are they opening the tab because they're anxious about the homework? If they're doing it because they're trying to get away from the homework, which is often why they're doing it, there needs to be some, teenager needs to be kind of helped to learn. Well, you're trying to get away from something that makes you uncomfortable. So you're going just towards something that makes you comfortable. Let's try to figure out how to make you more comfortable with the homework. And let's try to figure out how to let you have that reward of something pleasurable, that dopamine hit you're going to get from Minecraft or from social media. Let's try to figure out when it's good to give yourself that, and when and how we're going to help you stick with the part that makes you uncomfortable, the homework that you don't know how to do, or let's help kind of convince you that you are going to feel better ultimately when you go to do your Minecraft or play your Minecraft if you have kind of pushed through the muck first. And so building tolerance, like building frustration tolerance, helps with impulsivity.
Thank you for saying that, because it's this whole procrastination is emotional concept that we keep hearing over and over. And teaching your kid how to deal with frustration seems to have the biggest effect here based on everything that I've heard.
I'm glad to hear that, because that makes the most sense to me. Yeah. It makes the most sense just from a personal perspective. Like if I'm writing a boring neuropsych report, and I will say writing them is sometimes boring, parts of them are especially boring. Of course I want to check my email or peek at Facebook or do something that's going to give me like a social hit. I get to see a picture of so-and-so. That makes me smile or feel good. Looking at a bunch of neuropsych data doesn't always make me feel good. But I also know that, in the long run, I'm going to have less time with those people I want to peek at on Facebook if I spend time looking at the computer and don't push through the frustration. So being able to kind of hold that in mind and just know that there is a reward on the other side really helps. But the frustration part it's hard to teach. It's really, you have to teach that as a coach.
We all struggle with it still, right?
Yeah.
It's a huge issue for everybody.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes when we have an issue with something, we tend to get twice as angry at people who have the same issue, or our kids. Our kids especially. Well, take me to the other route. So take me to the younger student.
Yeah.
Pathways aren't as developed yet.
Yeah.
How do we get that child out the door on time in the morning when they keep impulsively finding something else to do morning after morning after morning?
First of all, I think that there's only so much that's going to get fixed perfectly. Like there does need to be kind of like some tolerance for there being a lot of variability. And like variability is the name of the game in ADHD, variability. So again, structure and like having everything for them staged. With the littler kids, parents unfortunately are going to be prosthetic frontal lobes for a longer time. So parents are going to be the frontal lobe and be doing the job of, 2 or 3 frontal lobes in addition to their own in order to get the kids out the door. So the more advanced preparation there is, the more the kids, don't have to go back into their room to get their stuff. It's by the door already. The more you can reduce. So this is the antecedents in that ABC model of behavior. The consequences, yelling at them for being late is never, ever going to work. But making sure that their backpack is already by the door the night before or the minute they get up, the more that can be set up for them to succeed. And then they succeed, and then you praise the success. So verbal input, probably not going to work. Consequences, probably not going to work. Just as much as you can do to get it set up in advance.
Well, and that's not only ADHD students. Like you look at people who are trying to build a fitness habit. It's all the books say put your fitness gear next to the door so you have that reminder right away the night before when you're not in that state of choosing, right?
Yeah.
And having a visual checklist on the bathroom mirror. Just like you said,
those are the things I go to.
Structure scaffolding.
Yeah.
Is going to give us the bang for our buck here while we're waiting for this part of the brain to develop.
Exactly.
Can we assess impulsivity? Like I know you're a neuropsych and you do assessment, but can we actually assess impulsivity?
Yeah. The testing itself can't give you the exact descriptions of the tests because we have to keep that, kind of our trade secrets. We don't want people like preparing before they come in for their testing. But it's really stuff that's not entirely surprising. So there's a test called like a go, no-go test where you basically are, having them respond to a target and it's target, non-target, and you have to withhold a response. And those things can be computerized. And so we can have kids, on a computer that measures their reaction time and measures how often they respond to a target when they're not supposed to respond. So that's the impulsive response or the disinhibited response. Some kids lean in the direction of accuracy. So they force themselves to go really slowly so they don't make a mistake. The balance between speed and errors or speed and accuracy is really interesting when you're looking at kids with ADHD because a lot of kids, they don't choose to bias accuracy or speed. They just automatically either put on the brakes so hard that they're never going to make an error, but it takes them twice as long, or they go so fast to get it over with as fast as possible, or to just race through it that they're going to make a lot of errors. And so we see impulsivity in the speed and accuracy trade-offs. And we have other tests that are basically meant to see, like, you give a person a planning problem or a problem-solving task, and we look to see how much time they spend planning, or how they plan. Do they plan effectively? Do they plan in a way that takes them way off course, or that like overcomplicates the task? Or do they not plan at all and they just mess it up, and then it takes them forever to find their way to the solution?
That's interesting. I've never heard the link between impulsivity and planning.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. We have tasks where there is an efficient way to do the task, and then there are lots of other ways. And a lot of people will look at the task and just automatically see the efficient way to do it. Now, an example of that I think of a lot of the time is, I've had clients come in to be tested, and they do sort of like what the actress did in The Queen's Gambit, where she could see the entire chess match ahead of executing the moves. She could play out all the moves in advance. And I've seen people do these tests that way, where they play out all the moves and they know which ones are wrong and they know which ones are right before they even pick up one of the pieces. That is good planning. That is extraordinarily good planning and good working memory in most cases. And a lot of kids with ADHD don't have the working memory to do that in their head. I don't have the working memory to do that in my head. I don't play chess like that. But they oftentimes just don't plan. They just look at the test and they start doing something. If they do trial and error. And so trial and error sometimes gets you there, but it usually takes longer to get there. You usually make more errors on the way. It's usually sloppier by the time you get it all put together. And the more you plan, the more likely you are to get to the final goal more quickly and more efficiently, and it's going to look better.
So if parents take the time to plan with their students, because we always recommend Sunday night planning, right?
Yeah.
Like look ahead at your week, because it develops these planning skills. Will that actually reduce impulsivity as well?
Oh yeah. Interesting. It's not going to eliminate it. It's not going to eliminate it. But like academic impulsivity oftentimes comes about because like a student doesn't know how to start or what to do. They don't initiate a task because they don't know how to initiate it. They don't know where to begin. They look at it and they see lots and lots of little pieces, things that need to be done, and they can't figure out which one to choose. And they're afraid it's going to be a mess when they're done. And so the emotion comes in, and then they really, really want to go on social media. They want to get away from this task. They don't know where to start. There's no map. There's no roadmap.
So this impulsivity and this end of them being on social media is often just due to a lack of planning skills up front.
I would think so.
Really, really interesting. I've never heard that connection before. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I want to come back to something you said to close this up. You made a comment about intelligence and impulsivity. It is hard when you know your child's IQ, or even if you don't, but they're bright.
Yeah.
And you keep seeing them do things. You're like, what are you doing? Is there a connection between intelligence and impulsivity? I
guess what's really important to know is that IQ and executive functions are not perfectly correlated. In other words, there are a lot of people who have supercharged high power brains that don't have a ton of control over, where they focus their attention or what's stimulating to them. They are very easily bored. Some of those kids are the twice exceptional kids that have like a superpower brain, and school is so boring and they just want to be like falling under their desk or doing anything but sitting and listening to something they already understand. And so they do things because their brain is too busy. It's too active. They don't have, and this is the word that I think I haven't used yet, which I'm surprised about, self-regulation. Their ability to self-regulate their attention and their emotions, to control what's going on inside of their head and their behavior when they're not really engaged. Like if they were doing a task they loved, they would be engaged and focused. They would just be cranking it out because they can. But if they're bored, their ability to self-regulate when they're either bored or overstimulated, to filter out too much information or to stay on task if it's not holding their attention, if it's not stimulating enough. It's that like keeping that middle ground, regulating their nervous system is really hard. And you can be the brightest person in the room, but like if you don't have the regulatory control to just make yourself sit through boredom and your brain is full of ideas, it's gonna come out. It's gonna come out your motor system somehow. You're gonna start moving around. You're gonna start looking for dopamine, for stimulation.
Yeah,
you're not getting it.
Well, and that's something you and I hear all the time. It's like, this child's so bright. Why are they doing this? So what is your advice for that to help them get regulated? Is it just this positive reinforcement, behavior modification you talked about, or is there something else here?
I think, this is not a plug for testing really, but it's going to sound like it. Really understanding what works for them and what doesn't. Kids are going to have to learn to tolerate boredom sometimes. We all have to do our taxes. We all have to do things that are boring. But really making sure there's enough stimulation for those kids who just can't sit through the boring stuff all the time. They need to have some things that are really going to stimulate and push their brains. Other kids need medication to quiet or to calm the extra energy. And that really, for some of them, it relieves anxiety. It relieves the frustration that they feel from having to try to keep it all inside when there's just too much going on in their brain and their body. And it allows them to be calmer, really, in a lot of cases, and just, tolerate the frustration or the boredom until they can get on to the class that they really love, and then they can shine and they can thrive and they can be excited again. So sometimes the answer to impulsivity is balancing out the dopamine so that it's not, just kind of all over the place. They're not craving it so much, or they're not looking for it. And sometimes it's more movement, in all honesty.
I was just saying, because it's exercise a piece of this too.
Oh, so much. So many of the super bright and super ADHD people that I work with, and I work with people of most ages, manage their ADHD almost entirely with exercise once they're out of school. Once they don't have to sit in a desk and listen to a teacher lecture them, and if they have control over their schedule, they would be miserable if they couldn't exercise every morning, or if they didn't have their routine that they looked forward to that helped them self-regulate. And it's really about regulating the chemicals and the sleep and the anxiety and all the things are better regulated when you move your body, when you exercise. We're meant to move. And so it was a great mission that you had to mentor through movement.
We still have the same mission, right?
I know you do.
We're still moving nonstop. So
I recommend that mission all the time.
Thank you so much for taking the time. Where can people learn more about you and your work?
So they could go to our website, which is New Peaks Neuropsych. So new and peaks as in mountain peaks, neuropsych.com. It has information about all 4 of our providers.
Awesome. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Brandon. This is fun.